Hi everybody, my name is Hannah and this is Pepper and Pine. Welcome to this series where we're exploring the curriculum for grade 4. I'm sharing with you the Waldorf inspired resources that you can use to accompany the grade 4 curriculum. I'm using the live education curriculum. Or you can use these resources to put together your own main lesson blocks. But honestly, once you see all the resources that I'm using, it probably will be easier just to get the main lessons from live education or from another curriculum. So we've already gone through the introduction of the 4th year. We've also done the video on grammar resources. Today we're going to be looking at the math main lesson block. So if you want to check out some of the other videos, you can find all of the videos listed in the description box below. You can also check out the blog post that accompanies this video for more information. That link is also in the description box below. So I do have other math videos, quite extensive math videos. So today we're going to do something a little bit shorter than I typically do. We're going to go over some of the math that you can expect in the 4th grade year and some of the resources that I have used and do recommend for grade 4. So even though fractions are introduced in grade 4, the student will still be needing to practice a lot of their multiplication facts because multiplication is going to take, in my opinion, several years to master. So the introduction of a particular subject area might be in the year that you see it in, but then for the following several years, that information is being mastered, or you're becoming proficient at it first before you master it, because a lot of these basic building blocks for math, you're going to need them for pre-algebra and algebra, and maybe in some capacity for geometry, but you definitely need them as you progress through the grades. So for these lessons, you're going to start or maybe finish up with some of your multiplication facts and just make sure that the students at least understand, even if they're not proficient in them, before you move into your fractions. Now, while I really love the Waldorf approach for many subject areas and for the development of the child, I find that diving into math this way, whether it's this curriculum or another curriculum, can be so challenging when it comes to fractions in particular. So my recommendation is to be using the terminology of math and fractions in particular years before you actually introduce it in a written form. And the way that would look like for young children is they understand, I think they understand the concept of half pretty well from about grade 1. Prior to that, or for instance, you can look at really young toddlers who don't quite understand quantity very much, or maybe they wouldn't take, like, say, 4 broken half cookies over 1 cookie, even though the 4 half cookies is more. Sometimes those concepts for really young children, they're not established yet. As the child gets older, the concept of half comes in kind of on the earlier side. So I would use that terminology, half, a third, use twice as much, often as the children are growing, so that the concept of, or the use of those words is in the child's vocabulary, even if the concept isn't well established, because the concept of parts of a whole is something that is reserved for the grade 4 student. Once they've gone through the 9-year change, the idea of portions or a part of is a lot easier for them to understand because they are now separate from the world. They can really see that they themselves they have their inner world, they have their themselves separate from the outer world. And there's also this understanding of time that's passed and time moving quickly, moving forward. There's all these changes that happen, and I do speak about them a little bit more in the first video in this series, so you can check that out. And then, of course, the curriculum has more extensive information on that as well. So the actual teaching of fractions is really best used, in my opinion, at grade 4, or, in my opinion, beyond grade 4. I feel the longer you wait for fractions, the easier it is for a student to comprehend them. But the terminology is part of the vocabulary that's going to be used prior to actually doing the lesson work. And generally, I will do our math main lesson block earlier on in the year. I tend to do it in the fall with the start of school so that the student has the whole year to practice these math concepts. And the only exception is with fractions. I would recommend that you wait till a little bit later in the year and do a lot more interactive math with fractions, a lot more living math with fractions before you actually dive in to the main lesson work. And this is not typical. I usually like to do the math at the beginning of the school year, but this is one instance where I do feel that a lot more living math, living practice is going to serve the students a little bit better. So you're going to be using a main lesson book with the main lesson block approach or main lesson approach. You can find, of course, more information on the first video where I talk about the main lesson and the main lesson books itself. And you can see here that they're using the landscape main lesson book, and that's going to work really well for working through fractions. I've used both the landscape and the portrait, so it's up to you what you'd like to do, but you can see how much easier it is to do this lesson work with the landscape. Although it probably is easy with the portrait as well, but the way that it's laid out here is quite visual. This book is going to go into imaginative math when it comes to fractions. And while I think this is a brilliant approach, for my mind, it didn't work so well. And I prefer a bit more of a maybe an intellectual approach when it comes to certain math concepts. So I did not use this extensively or often with my children. We did use it, but not as well as the curriculum would have suggested, and I did not use it with all of my children. We chose to use some of the math resources more heavily than the main lesson block, and we had more workbook activity and more living math versus more math that went into our main lesson book. Now, we still did a lot of the projects with fractions, the visualization of these fractions. We did still do a lot of that, but we did that in a more lesson activity rather than in an activity or a lesson work that would go into the main lesson book. So let me share with you some of the resources that you can use for grade 4. I love the Key to series. They have Key to fractions, decimals, percents, measurements, metric measurements, algebra, and geometry. There may be more, but those are the ones that we have used extensively, very consistently with all 4 of my children. We have used this series, and I love it so much. So this series has a very simple approach to any of the subject areas that I just mentioned. It's so easy that it's almost child-led, self-directed. There's very little explanation that's needed from the teacher or the parent. That's if you are doing this at the correct grade level. If you're finding that you have to help your child extensively with the material, it might mean that they're not quite ready for it. This is generally used as practice, not usually used as the main lesson, but I have to admit that I have used this extensively as the primary learning outside of our experiential learning. So I have used this over textbooks or main lesson books. I like this because for the most part, there aren't too many questions. For the most part, it divides the subject areas very simply. It's very progressive, 1 page or 2 pages for one concept. You get to practice it before moving on. Each step that you're moving on is a small step. It's very sequential. I really love the approach. The fractions comes with 4 books, and then it also comes with an answer key as well. They're sold separately or in a bundle. You can find them all over the internet. I think I used to buy them from Rainbow Resource when we would buy them. These are now extra because I'm down to homeschooling my last child. We have Key to measurements, and of course they come with the answer key as well. And I think there are 4 books in this series. There's also metric measurement as well. And then you have the percents, which I think only have 3 books, and I think I've got 2 sets here. So 4 and there's decimals, that's for this grade level as well, which I don't have handy to show you. So for grade 4, I would use fractions decimals, and percents in that order. And I would also use measurement and metric measurement. And with the measurement, you can do some of the work before you go through fractions. The rest of it you need to do after fractions. And so when I haven't been ready to present fractions to my students, I've done the measurement, and then they will work through it until they get to the part where you need fractions or proportions. And then I will stop that book, and then we'll move on to fractions, and then we will return to the measurement book. So quite a few for grade 4, and whatever you don't finish in grade 4, you can definitely bump to grade 5, especially for decimals and percents, because I feel like that takes a lot longer. I feel like these are 3 huge topics to explore in 1 year. And I found that my students did take much longer to really absorb and understand these concepts. So we spent a lot of the 4th grade year actually going over our general math facts and multiplication facts quite extensively. So some of the things that I have to share with you here are for opening activities, for proficiency work, and for multiplication. So I'm going to first take you actually to teaching mathematics in Rudolf Steiner schools for classes 1 through 8. This is a fabulous resource if you're looking to create your own curriculum or your own main lesson blocks without the use of curriculum. I found this to be a little bit challenging to work through on my own, so I did prefer to have a curriculum that went through all the different grades and explanations for those grades. But if you felt compelled to do it on your own, this is a fabulous resource. It's really extensive for all 8 grades. I have just only good things to say about it. Even though we did not use it as extensively as I wanted, it was a great resource to see the progression of all the lessons from grade 1 to 8. Another great resource is called Active Math. Now, we got this after we had already done quite a bit of active math as it is, and so it was great to see these examples in print, but honestly, it's, in my opinion, really difficult to extrapolate how to actually do these from reading a book. I found it a lot easier for me to experience these things, and I had the fortune of going to a few different Waldorf conferences in person where we got to experience these things. And once I did them with other adults and we practiced some of these active math like techniques, then I was able to bring them to our homeschool a lot better. So one of the things that we did, we can use bean bags. We could also use our counting sticks, which are basically dowels. You could do this with your hands by clapping. And that is to do something that's active while you're doing math. And so these are just 2 bean bags that you can toss back and forth if you're just in a classroom of 1. And if you're in a classroom of many, you can combine the students into groups of 2 or 3. Note that what you hope would only be like a 10-minute project, exercise, opening activity, will end up being much longer and way more chaotic than you expect. But you can use these to toss back and forth, and each time you're tossing them, you can be doing a math fact. For instance, you could do your skip counting in preparation for the multiplication tables. You could do 3, 6, 9, and go back and forth. Or you could do 3 is 1 times 3, or you could do 6 is 2 times 3, or or 3 times 1, or 3 times 2. You can begin with the 3, like 3 is 3 times 1, 6 is 3 times 2. You can do it that way. Or you can do 2 times 6, and then you can shout out 12. And I don't know why I didn't go stick with the 3s. You can do 2 times 3, and then you can shout out 6, for instance. And then you're tossing them back and forth. And now there's a lot that goes into this. There's coordination. There is unison with the person that you're tossing it to. There is keeping the same pace. If you're tossing back with like 2 is 1 times 2, and all of a sudden you have a student say 2 is 1 times 2, then that's obviously not going to work. So there's a lot that goes into doing active math, and that's just with the bean bags. If you want your children to stay at their seats, you can be clapping if you want to do that instead, or you can use counting sticks. I call them counting sticks. They're just dowels that you can tap. It gets a little bit noisy. That's another option that you can do. Something that engages the body while they're doing their math facts. I also have this book called Painless Fractions, and if you want to have something that's a little bit story driven but not exactly, and something that can take you through the different topics without a textbook, then this would be a really great resource for you. I love having these resources, but I haven't utilized them just one resource entirely. Sometimes I will take like an idea from a book or a technique from another, or a math trick from another book, because we have a book on like lots of math tricks on how to do multiplication and addition and all these different wacky ways that you wouldn't otherwise know. But I'm not utilizing just one book from cover to cover. When I've done that in the past, it's taken a lot of our time with not the results that I expected. So I like these as resources more so than something that I'm definitely going to use like every day with a main lesson or in lieu of a main lesson. Now, the reason why I like showing these is that there are some students, some families where this is just perfect for them, because they have a child or a student where this is going to be just the right kind of math for them. So I want to share with you as many of the resources that we've used or that we have so that you can pick the right ones for your family. So I do utilize some workbooks, not often, but we use them for our daily work. So we use them when we are practicing math facts especially, and we use them when we are practicing grammar concepts, but we're not going to use them as a tool for learning unless it's the Key to Fraction series or Key to Decimal series, in addition to our engaging math, the math that we're actually engaged in. But as far as, say, a textbook and a workbook, we're not going to use those typically as part of our new learning. We will definitely use them as part of our review learning. So a book like this, which is just super simple in that it's just your multiplication tables. I think it's I think it's just the 12 multiplication tables, and you just have the same work over and over again. You're just practicing it daily. Then this is the kind of work that I like, because you can do one page or one page front and back. You can pull them out of this workbook and you can staple them with other kinds of work that you can give your child on a daily basis. It can be part of their opening activities or independent work. It can take 10 minutes or less or more, depending on the age of the child. It's great to keep them engaged and doing some learning while you're preparing other work. And I love including that to get them proficient and eventually master some of those math facts that they have been learning throughout the years. Fractions in disguise. I love using picture books with all of our lessons. Again, it's not something you would typically find in a Waldorf setting, but I love including them in our opening activities. And sometimes it's just that little change in perspective that helps them understand a concept, especially when it comes to math. It takes, in my opinion, so much to really internalize fractions, decimals, and percents that you never know what kind of resource or activity is going to help connect those dots together for that child to really comprehend that math concept. Fractions, decimals, and percents. This is another picture book. I love using these either to introduce ideas that we're going to learn later on or to review ideas that we have previously done. I love using books like this for that purpose, and having multiple kids in a homeschool. Right now I'm just homeschooling my last one, but generally having multiple children in a homeschool means that you always have someone who's looking forward to a lesson, or someone who needs that extra review because they've already done that lesson, or someone who's right in the middle of that lesson. And that's a really great opportunity to keep those skills sharp because you are constantly either preparing, reviewing, or doing those lessons. Math in the Garden is one of my favorite resources of all time when it comes to math. It is brilliant because it combines working out in nature with math that is practical and informative, and it makes sense and it has purpose, and I love it so much. We have so many videos just on this book alone. You can find that complete playlist down the description box below so you can get some ideas. This book may be difficult to find, so if you find it secondhand or you find it on a website, I would snatch it up. It's just so that you know, I think it was around $30-ish. So if you find it for that or less, definitely pick it up. It was such a great resource for us. And this is a great way to have practical living math that includes fractions, proportions, measurement, and more. So here's another, I have a couple of workbooks, and these are for grade 4, so ages 9, 10, even 11. And this again goes through the math that you will have learned in grade 4. So I wouldn't necessarily use this in grade 4. I would use this in grade 5 and 6 and even 7, because this is going to help polish up whatever that child kind of didn't quite understand and had some time to grow and mature and live the math, so that when you come back to the workbook, it makes a lot more sense. And then one more workbook we have is a Kumon workbook. A lot of times I will get these workbooks like hand-me-down or secondhand, or, you know, at a library bookstore for not very much. And I'll just collect those, because even if I'm not in grade 4, this is going to help for grade 5 and 6, even though the concepts are introduced earlier on. I think the mastery of these concepts happens later. I have a few that are sort of new resources for us, so I only used it for 1 or 2 of my 4 children. And this one of them is a multiplication board. This one, mistakenly, I bought this one and it only goes up to the 9s multiplication, and this one goes up to 12. And we use this one extensively with 1, maybe 2 of my children. I really like this one because it's just so gorgeous. And what we would do is, on occasion, we would dump them all out, and so they have the question on one side and the answer on the other side. And we would dump them all out, and then we would start to pick them, and I would pick one and give the question to my son or my daughter. And then if they got it right, they would, you know, if they got it wrong, it wasn't a big deal. I'd give them time to get it right. And one little teaching technique that I learned many years ago is to wait when they give you an answer. Don't just jump on them to say it was right or wrong. Give them some breath to correct themselves if they've done it wrong, because almost always my kids will correct themselves if they've given an immediate answer that's wrong, either spelling or a question or a math fact. They usually can correct themselves, and it gives them the confidence rather than the anxiety of being corrected right away if they're wrong. So just a little tip that if you're doing these, give them a moment, and if they get it right, or when they get it right, we'll just put the little peg back onto the board, and that way that's part of the cleanup. And then we ended up getting the 12 times table, which doesn't look quite as nice, and because it has so many more questions, sometimes we would either partially take them out or would take them all out, but it'd take us a couple of days to answer all the questions and put them back in. Sometimes we would do the answer and try to do the person would say the question, and then other times we would say the question and then they would say the answer. So 2 different ways to play this. Really liked this resource. It's not good for really young children. Like if you've got toddlers or younger, these are choking hazards, so do be really careful. So in that case, it's not great. Also, if you tend to lose pieces for games because that's your vibe in your family, this might be one where if you're the kind of person that really wants all the pieces and not lose the one, this is really easy to lose pieces. We just happen to be careful with ours, and I would not put it away without having all of the pieces, but I realize that that's not typical. So this is one thing that you could lose those pieces pretty easily. So I just wanted to put that out there with some of these math manipulatives. So this was the same. The quality of this one is not quite as good, but at least it has the full 12 times tables. And then this one goes through the fractions, and I really, really like the showcase of fractions being presented this way, because then you can really see, like say the 12ths here, 1/12, like you need all 12 to create the 1. So you can really see how this is divided up and it still equals 1, or the halves, and then you can see that it has the fraction and the decimal on the other side. So I really like having these kinds of tools at the ready to have a visual to explain some of these math concepts that, in my opinion, for fractions, I really think it's one of the most challenging math topics to master, maybe outside of algebra in the younger years, like say before high school. I find fractions to be, and decimals and percents to be super challenging. So having as many resources as you can have that you find appropriate is really helpful, because you just don't know what's going to click for the child. And of course, do as much hands-on as you possibly can, because I do feel like that really helps them. One more thing I want to show you is a game. We have tons of math games, but I want to show you this one. it's for multiplication and division, because the one for fractions is so advanced. I would not recommend it until your child was well into middle school or even high school. I believe the fraction one is one of the most challenging ones, that and the integers one. So this one is going to go over multiplication, and this is great for 4th grade because, again, we're still trying to master the multiplication tables, which in my experience took well into late elementary and into middle school before it was truly mastered, and that's just for our family. But these games are a lot of fun to play. You can just pull out like maybe 5 or 10 cards. They come with different abilities, from 1 point or 1 dot to 3 dots being the hardest, and that way you can, depending on your child's ability, choose the cards necessary, or you can give your child the easy cards and you can take the hard cards, or if you're not so great at math, you can reverse that. But I really like including these kinds of math games into our opening activities along with some movement math. I think that sums it up. I hope that this video was helpful to you. I hope that you'll check out some of the other videos in this series. You can find all of those links down in the description box below. Don't forget to check out the blog post that accompanies this video with all of the resources that you'll find here, plus more, as well as links to all of the materials that I've used. And if you'd like to see how we're using these math games in our homeschool, you can find us on Instagram at Pepper and Pine.